guys. So when we left Mary, she had decided to go off wandering through the house and see what she can see. So I have my newer version of the book today. Same words, just different copy. And here's the picture of her talking to Martha. It was a long corridor, and it branched into other corridors, and it led her up short flights of steps, which mounted to others again. There were doors, and there were pictures on the walls. Sometimes they were pictures of dark, curious landscapes, but oftenest they were portraits of men and women in strange, grand costumes made of satin and velvet. She found herself in one long gallery whose walls were covered with these portraits. She had never thought there would be so many in a house. She walked slowly down this place and stared at the faces, which also seemed to stare at her. She felt as if they were wondering what a little girl from India was doing in this house. Some were pictures of children, little girls in thick satin frocks which reached to their feet and stood out about them, and boys with puffed sleeves and lace collars and long hair, or with big ruffs around their necks. She always stopped to look at the children and wonder what their names were and where they had gone and why they wore such odd clothes. There was a stiff, plain little girl, rather like herself. She wore a green brocade dress and held a green parrot on her finger. Her eyes had a sharp, curious look. "Where do you live now?" said Mary out loud to her. "I wish you were here." Surely no other little girl ever spent such a strange morning. It seemed as if there were no one in all the huge rambling house but her own small self, wandering about upstairs and down, through narrow passages and wide ones, where it seemed to her that no one but herself had ever walked. Since so many rooms had been built, people must have lived in them, but it all seemed so empty that she could not quite believe it true. It was not until she climbed to the second floor that she thought of turning the handle of a door. All the doors were shut, as Mrs. Medlock had said they were. But at last she put her hand on the handle of one of them and turned it. She was almost frightened for a moment when she felt that it turned without difficulty, and that when she pushed upon the door itself, it slowly and heavily opened. It was a massive door and opened into a big bedroom. There were embroidered hangings on the wall, and inlaid furniture, such as she had seen in India, stood about the room. A broad window with leaded panes looked out upon the moor, and over the mantel was another portrait of the stiff, plain little girl, who seemed to stare at her more curiously than ever. "Perhaps she slept here once," said Mary. "She stares at me, and she makes me feel strange." After that she opened more doors and more. She saw so many rooms that she became quite tired, and began to think that there must be 100, though she had not counted them. In all of them were old pictures or old tapestries with strange scenes on them. There were curious pieces of furniture and curious ornaments in nearly all of them. In one room, which looked like a lady's sitting room, the hangings were all embroidered velvet, and in a cabinet were about 100 little elephants made of ivory. They were of different sizes, and some of them had palanquins on their backs. That's like when the elephant is holding kind of like a little structure that someone could sit in. Some were much bigger than the others, and some were so tiny that they seemed only babies. Mary had seen carved ivory in India, and she knew all about elephants. She opened the door of the cabinet and stood on a footstool and played with these for quite a long time. When she got tired, she set the elephants in order and shut the door of the cabinet. In all her wanderings through the long corridors and the empty rooms, she had seen nothing alive. But in this room, she saw something. Just after she had closed the cabinet door, she heard a tiny rustling sound. It made her jump and look around at the sofa by the fireplace, from which it seemed to come. In the corner of the sofa there was a cushion, and in the velvet which covered it was a hole, and out of the hole peeped a tiny head with a pair of frightened eyes in it. Mary crept softly across the room to look. The bright eyes belonged to a little gray mouse, and the mouse had eaten a hole in the cushion and made a comfortable nest there. 6 baby mice were cuddled up asleep near her. If there was no one else alive in the 100 rooms, there were 7 mice, who did not look lonely at all. "If they wouldn't be so frightened, I would take them back with me," said Mary. She had wandered about long enough to feel too tired to wander any farther, and she turned back. 2 or 3 times she lost her way by turning down the wrong corridor, and was obliged to ramble up and down until she found the right one. But at last she reached her own floor again, though she was some distance from her own room and did not know exactly where she was. "I believe I've taken a wrong turning again," she said, standing still at what seemed the end of a short passage with a tapestry on the wall. "I don't know which way to go. How still everything is." It was while she was standing there, and just after she had said this, that the stillness was broken by a sound. It was another cry, but not quite like the one she had heard last night. It was only a short one, a fretful, childish whine muffled by passing through walls. "It's nearer than it was," said Mary, her heart beating rather faster, "and it is crying." She put her hand accidentally upon the tapestry near her, and then sprang back quite startled. The tapestry was the covering of a door, which fell open and showed her that there was another part of the hallway behind it, and Mrs. Medlock was coming up it with her bunch of keys in her hand and a very cross look on her face. "What are you doing here?" she said, and she took Mary by the arm and pulled her away. "What did I tell you?" "I turned round the wrong corridor," explained Mary. "I didn't know which way to go, and I heard someone crying." She quite hated Mrs. Medlock in that moment, but she hated her even more the next. "You didn't hear anything of the sort," said the housekeeper. "You come along back to your own nursery, or I'll box your ears." And she took her by the arm and half pushed, half pulled her up one passage and down another until she pushed her in at the door of her own room. "Now," she said, "you stay where you're told to stay, or you'll find yourself locked up. The master had better get you a governess, same as he said he would. You're one that needs someone sharp to look after you. I've got enough to do." She went out of the room, slammed the door after her, and Mary went and sat on the hearthrug, pale with rage. She did not cry, but she ground her teeth. "There was someone crying. There was, she said to herself. She heard it twice now, and sometimes she would find out. She had found out a great deal this morning. She felt as if she had been on a long journey, and at any rate she had had something to amuse her all the time, and she had played with the ivory elephants and had seen the gray mouse and its babies in their nest in the velvet cushion. And tomorrow's chapter title is very exciting. Tomorrow's chapter title is The Key to the Garden.